Well, as we've been speaking about tonight, Foreign Minister Penny Wong has outrageously compared the liberal democracy of Israel to dictatorships Russia and China. Israel, which is under existential threat as it fights for its survival. Now, these are inflammatory remarks when anti-Semitism is at fever pitch. As I've told you tonight, Shadow Home Affairs Minister James Paterson told me today that Penny Wong's slur continues Labor's campaign of vilification against the Jewish state. He said it contributes to the climate of fear that Jewish Australians are feeling right now. And I brought you Liberal Senator and Australia's former ambassador to Israel, Dave Sharma's comments before, and I'm pleased to say he joins me live now. Dave Sharma, welcome to the show once again. Look, what are your thoughts? Do you think Penny Wong needs to calm down her rhetoric because she's fanning the flames of anti-Semitism with her constant criticism of the Jewish state?
I think her remarks in her prepared speech, and these were prepared remarks, were outrageous, an outrageous comparison, but particularly inflammatory in the days after the Jewish community is reeling from the shock of the firebombing of the Adass synagogue. We all need to be careful with our language at this time. And comparing Israel, a liberal democratic state that is fighting for its survival, that was attacked unprovoked on the 7th of October and has been attacked many times subsequently since, with expansionist autocratic powers like China and Russia, simply condones and encourages the sort of anti-Israel sentiment we've seen on the streets, which is becoming very quickly anti-Semitic and anti-Jewish as well. So I think it was a particularly ill-timed intervention by the Foreign Minister, and I think she should be much more careful with her language, given she is Australia's chief diplomat.
Yeah, well, for Australia's chief diplomat, she doesn't use very diplomatic language when it comes to Israel. Dave Sharma, when we spoke a bit earlier, the quote you gave me that I played on the screen, you said it's effectively like a dog whistle. Can you expand on that?
I think it is. It's effectively condoning and encouraging people who are inclined to vilify Israel and consequently vilify the Jewish people. So it's effectively giving it a licence or creating a permissive environment for people to go out and continue to say that Israel is guilty of the most monstrous crimes and the Jewish people in Australia should be held accountable for that. Now, that might not be the Foreign Minister's intention, but the way she is using language in a very loose and ill-disciplined fashion like this, it can only have that consequence. And surely by now, the Prime Minister and other senior Labor ministers should have learnt the lesson that they all need to be more careful with their public utterances to take some of the temperature out of this issue in Australia. But, you know, they're singularly failing to do so. And I'm just shocked that, as I said, a few days after the synagogue was firebombed, we are still seeing Labor ministers speaking in such inflammatory terms.
Not only that, but we saw Chris Bowen yesterday and then Ed Husic today. They can't talk about anti-Semitism without speaking about Islamophobia. I mean, what's their problem?
I just find it so hard to explain. I mean, do you need to name-check every form of discrimination when you are talking about one that is particularly problematic? It just strikes me as so weird. If there are, you know, if and when evidence of Islamophobia presents itself, yes, we should condemn it and we should discuss it. But I'm seeing synagogues being firebombed. I haven't seen mosques being firebombed. I've seen Jewish people have their details outed publicly, doxed. I've seen Jewish-owned businesses defaced with graffiti. I've seen an increase in armed presence outside Jewish schools, Jewish religious institutions, Jewish hospitals. That is not happening to any other religious community in Australia. So I don't see why it is so hard for them to recognise this for what it is, anti-Semitism, and treat it as a priority rather than saying, you know, it's one of a host of a number of societal ills that we should be dealing with. This is a problem that is out of control and at emergency levels in Australia, but the Albanese government still seems to be treating it as a business as usual proposition.
And, you know, the Albanese government, after quite intense pressure behind the scenes, let me tell you, they eventually announced $32 million in funding for security for the Jewish community. But then, Dave Sharma, they went and said that it can't be used for armed guards. I mean, how do they want the guards to protect synagogues and schools, like with a wet lettuce? It's absurd.
It is absurd. And I mean, it is also, I welcome the additional security funding, but it's also treating the symptoms rather than the disease. The disease that we've
Yes.
got is anti-Semitism. And, all the armed guards in the world are not going to make the Jewish community feel safe if they're constantly being vilified, harassed, menaced. If it's not happening physically, if it's happening online, if it's happening to their businesses, that's what the government needs to be addressing. And I wish they would demonstrate that sort of resolve to tackling the causes of this anti-Semitism we're seeing in Australia.
I just want to turn now, before you go, to the fall of the Assad regime in Syria. Look, there have been celebrations, also some notes of caution. The rebels who've seized the country are still, well, at least some of them have been part of Islamic State, Al-Qaeda style groups in the past. How do you interpret the move, and are you a bit concerned about what the regime will look like?
Well, I'm certainly cautious. Undoubtedly, I think the departure of the Assad regime is a good thing. He was one of the most murderous, destabilising rulers in the Middle East, cruel and oppressive towards his own people. And he was part of the Iranian-led Axis of Resistance or bloc, which has caused so much misery and destabilisation in the region. So that is a good thing. But we're right to be cautious about what takes its place. I mean, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, yes, it was an offshoot of Al-Qaeda. Al-Jawlani, the leader of HTS, got his start joining Al-Qaeda in Iraq in 2003. So we should be very cautious about this group. It's still a listed terrorist organisation. But they have said, at least initially, that they intend to respect Syria's ethnic and religious diversity. We need to hold them to that, but we shouldn't be getting carried away here. I mean, I hope the future for Syria is better than the past, 50 years under the Assad regime has been, but it would be naive to expect that to be the case.
Indeed, indeed. Look, it shows the weakness of Russia and Iran, no question. But again, I remember when the Taliban returned to power after Joe Biden's hasty withdrawal, and the Taliban promised it was going to be a new era for women. And now we're seeing women living in the most oppressive circumstances in Afghanistan in recent history. Dave Sharma, really appreciate your time. Thank you.